Uh,
Well, I seem to have used up all my time, so maybe it's probably best not to do this, but let me just make a few comments and then I'll stop. Oh, God, what a mess. Welcome to Dis and Dat a bit late today for a lot of reasons. Needless to say, I'm going to continue with what we were looking at yesterday on the 99 Theses of Brian Masumi. And this may just, bore people to tears, but uh, the front end of this, I think, is Masumi has other intentions with the 99 Thesis. It's to support this basic idea of a kind of that affect is important. As That is, there's certain things that are being culturally produced. The idea of that in a more complete way, when we think about surplus value, that surplus value is also something beyond the making of goods in that sense. And so it kind of gets off in not the weeds necessarily, but I think in a kind of place that is perhaps not as productive as one would like. But where I was last night was to talk a little bit about, or to think a little bit about, lost my place again. There it is. What I wanted to start with, and I'll probably continue this tomorrow, because since I do this at a sort of eternal speed, is an article on value, rent, and finance before I so rudely fell asleep last night. And it is a group article. Um, Purcell, Loftus, and Hug. um, we it is a they think it's novel. I don't think it's that novel, but whatever. Interpretation of the internal relationship between value, rent, and finance, enabling a new reading of the process of financialization. Uh, uh, as we argue, responding to the important question of how best to conceptualize the relationship between value and finance necessitates an understanding of the internal relations with a third moment, that of rent. And, in some ways, this is let me break for a second and say this is it's not the Holy Grail, but it is certainly pointing towards explaining what, and the advantage, of course, is somebody who's worked out a lot of done the work for me, is to see how rent relates to financialization. There's work on it. I just haven't gotten to it yet. As we argue, responding to the important question of how best to conceptualize the relationship between value and finance necessitates an understanding of the internal relations with a third moment, that of rent. We therefore develop a triadic understanding of these three interrelated moments. Crucially, we demonstrate that fictitious capital now actively pursues forms of rent, deepening the interrelationship between value, rent, and finance. We conclude with a critical review of the literature on the financialization of water, also something I was interested in, showing how the conceptual framework we develop sheds light upon the relations out of which water infrastructure has been financialized, as well as suggesting strategic entry points for its contestation. And an important provocation, Brett Christopher's, he's done a lot of work on financialization and has a new book, points to a strange paradox as research on value theory and nature has flourished, it has done so without appearing to engage with research on the financialization of nature. The apparent absence of dialogue between these bodies of work appears to confirm Christopher's suspicion that Marxist approaches to value could be at risk when it comes to analyzing the efflorescing profits of finance. Willing to take up this risk, he then develops a rich conversation between value theory and finance by considering the value produced within financial practices. In doing so, Christopher demonstrates that finance does produce surplus value and therefore can be analyzed from a Marxist value theoretic perspective. The literature on the financialization of water appears to confirm the paradox that Christopher observes. Thus, several pioneering accounts of water financialization make explicit reference to value creation, value extraction, and the circulation of value without ever clearly specifying what is meant by value. A conversation with value theory thus appears foreclosed. In what follows, we take up Christopher's challenge, but we do so by arguing that a value theoretic approach to finance can be enriched by simultaneously taking into account a third moment, that of rent. Our paper therefore charts a different path from that pursued by Christopher's, for whom the production of risk should be viewed as a source of surplus value. Unconvinced by the category of fictitious capital, a claim on future value production because it suggests that finance is unproductive, Christopher sees the commodification of risk as the best way of accounting for how finance creates value for capital. The merit of this in and against reading of Marxian value theory is its ability to identify financial services as commodities and highlight the exploitation of labor in the technical work required for production of risk-bearing assets. Nevertheless, while recognizing that the labors involved in producing fungible globules of risk can indeed be seen as generative of value, we're not convinced that this is a sufficient explanation of the magnitude and constitution of profits appropriated on the back of the financialization of nature and society. Indeed, the payments of bills or insurance premiums, as any household will directly experience, is a deduction from present and future value in the wage form. No new value is created. Instead, we would argue that the efflorescence of research on rent testifies to the strategic and intellectual importance of bringing the issues Christopher's identifies into dialogue. We do so through what we refer to as the value rent finance triad. Just as land and infrastructure are treated as financial assets, their commodification is predicated on rent. In this phenomenal form, value is extracted from various forms of private monopoly, which in turn are actively sought out by fictitious capital. Stating that rents are actively sought out by fictitious capital should not be confused with the claim, going back to the work of Veblen, that financial or absolute rent akin to profits creates a parasitic relation with industrial capital. Rather, we follow the internal relation between rent and the circulation of interest-bearing capital to unpack the social relations of private monopoly ownership that mediate the capitalization of revenue streams attached to nature and infrastructure. Doing so significantly deepens our knowledge of how value is extracted from particular material geographies implicated in the capitalization of everything. Indeed, the rent finance link is suggestive of other geographical contexts in which the revenue streams or raw materials of financialization rest on monopoly ownership in sectors not subject to the competitive equalization of profit rates. In this vein, we read rent and finance as one-sided abstractions or phenomenal forms of value, crystallizing in determinate historical and geographical conditions. The crucial problem for analyzing the financialization of infrastructure is to understand why rent and finance take the forms that they do within the capitalization, that is, the valorization of the asset. After conceptualizing the value rent finance triad, we turn into the later part of the paper to a critical review of the literature on the financialization of water, showing how our analytic might be put to work. Applying the Marxian categories of monopoly and absolute rent, in the final section, we explore existing studies of the financialization of water in order to demonstrate how value, rents, and finance are internally related moments comprising the process of financialization. While our focus is on water, the triadic structure, we hope, can also serve as a general analytic with much wider applicability in other geographies and in relation to Purcell et al. Other resources. The paper, therefore, speaks squarely to the debates around financialization. Section 1, value. As Christopher's notes, work on value theory is flourishing. Thus, several excellent reviews now directly address the question of how Marx's theory of value might provide a more comprehensive analysis of nature's political economy, recognizing that the source of value is labor, expressed in the socially necessary labor, time, and production. This literature concurs that it is capitalism rather than Marxism that does not value nature. Insofar as Marx is quite explicit that nature is a source of wealth appropriated by capital. Contributions by Walker and Moore, alongside with other substantive contributions from Kay, Kenny, Lazar, etc., confirm that value theory is very much back on the agenda. Marx's theory of value, as Huber writes, is a critical theory to explain and critique the conditions of labor in a society characterized by generalized commodity exchange. That is, a society in which most people can only live through access to money and commodities. Laying out 5 theses through which such a critical theory might speak to questions of nature and its exploitation, Huber is able to demonstrate the importance of Marx's value theory for a range of contemporary debates around conservation, payment for ecosystem services, and social reproduction. With regard to the latter, he turns to Moore's contributions to Marx's value theory, in which the former develops a conversation with feminist critiques in order to better understand capital's reliance on cheap, as it were, inputs of labor, energy, food, and materials for its own expansion. Elsewhere, Walker develops a sensitive critique of Moore in order to better express the manner in which value is produced by the dialectical unity of labor nature, an approach that requires a unified labor nature time. Adriana Blashu takes a somewhat different approach, basing much of her analysis on around the appropriation of rents and the manner in which natural conditions enable reduced or increased rents. Within this approach, nature is an important source of wealth for societies and is essential for human reproduction, but it cannot create value since no labor was used to produce it. In drawing out this nuance, Blashu emphasizes not only the connection between surplus value and rent, but the way in which socio-environmental change has important economic implications for the operation of capitalism. As with Blashu's contributions, geographical engagements with value theory stretch considerably further back than this latest return. Indeed, Marx's value theory can be seen to have profoundly influenced the writings of Harvey, Smith, and many others. That's Neil Smith on uneven development. More recently in Mann's writings and in Huber's work, as well as at times in the work of Henderson, there has been a generative turn to value form analysis, in particular the work of Moshe Bastoni, who makes one of his most articulate and advanced arguments for an understanding of value as a critical category, that is code of capital, etc. Overcoming this critical category as a determinate mode of production becomes a central aim of political practice. Bastoni thus moves away from a critique of capitalism from the standpoint of labor to a critique of labor in capitalism. There are many affinities in such an approach with the argument made by Diane Elson in her groundbreaking essay on the value theory of labor, and it's no surprise that Elson's work has garnered renewed attention in many of the most recent geographical essays. Perhaps the clearest influence has been on Huber, who seeks to develop a value theory of nature along the same lines as Elson's original essay. One of the many reasons why Elson's framework has received renewed attention is her remarkable ability to explore value theory methodologically. The entire essay, therefore, represents an exercise in applying Marx's dialectic to better understand value theory, taking this methodological understanding of value, the Ori, as a political challenge to uh, as a political challenge to the forms of exploitation highlighted within. Elson's political reading of value theory and her focus on the different aspects of value are crucially important to the value of important for the analysis we develop. It is therefore worth spending a little time reviewing Elson's overall approaches that forms the method for the triadic reading of value theory we then apply to our rereading of financialization. Elson begins her text by emphasizing what value theory is not. She distinguishes her approach from those that find within it a proof of exploitation. Now, even if Elson accepts the political importance of such an argument, an explanation of prices, a theory that distinguishes Marx's approach from Ricardo's around its consideration of abstract labor, and so on. Huber follows a similar route in the first two of his theses on a value theory of nature, in which he states that value theory does not refer to all values, and nature does not contribute to value. The error that Elson detects in each of the different understandings of value is one of misplaced concreteness, an error that Christophers perhaps falls foul of in his attempt to couple financial risk with the exploitation of labor performed beyond the workplace. Elson therefore claims that other interpretations misunderstand value theory as a relation between certain already determined given independent variables located in the process of production and certain to be determined dependent variables located in the process of circulation. And I'll just close with these particular points. Labor time, value, and exchange value should not therefore be understood to be three distinct variables. Elson's alternative is to develop a philosophy of internal relations, that is Bertel Ollman's work on alienation, that analyzes different moments or aspects, as Elson refers to them, crystallizing in different forms according to historically and geographically determining conditions. In such a reading, labor time becomes an immanent measure of value that should be read in relation to the external measure of money, of value in the form of money. This is probably the important point here, and I'll stop after this paragraph. In many respects, we would argue that Elson's work can be used to critique more simplistic analyses of financialization, as well as critique more nuanced approaches that appear to take categories such as value and finance as discrete. That's a criticism that could be made of Michael Hudson's work, but whatever. To close, instead, the triadic analysis that we go on to develop seeks to understand the phenomenal forms in which value comes to appear. This is a Masumi's kind of idea, that there is some materiality at work, and that I don't think you necessarily need to go that far, but whatever. So while Elson's analysis focuses on different aspects of labor, that is, social and private labor, alongside abstract and concrete labor, her approach to value, along with the value theoretic method that she lays out, is of real use in furthering understandings of value, rent, and finance. Didn't even use an Oxford comma there. Just as the different aspects of labor that Elson focuses on can be read as one-sided abstractions, so rent and finance can be read as one-sided abstractions or phenomenal forms of value. I'll come back to that, and I think that's worth focusing on. And let me thank you for indulging my sleep patterns. And I don't know if there's any. Oh my. Uh, anyway, I will stop the live stream and